Thank you so much for joining us. Today we are in studio with Khánh H. We're so excited to be able to have this virtual interaction, and Khánh has done a lot of preparation. So thank you so much for your generosity in your time and your efforts to bring us into your world. I'm very excited to see what you've been working on.
Well, welcome to my studio. I'm going to hope to take you a tour of my very small little studios that I get to by myself oftentimes. This is the world that I sort of escape to when I need to think, go through my thoughts, or read a book, or doing works that sort of beyond just everyday or engaging with normal people. And so this is where I love to be most of my time. I try to dedicate to the practice at least 2 to 3 hours a day, so that it allow me, I don't have to normally come down here to paint all the time. I can just come down here to draw, to organize my materials, which I'm going to introduce to you, or to do anything so that it makes me feel somehow that I'm in the process of building something, and then it allowed me to continue to feel that continual practice. So this space allowed me to do that, to sort of escape. And so here we go. I'm going to bring you first over to my table in the studio, so that you get an opportunity to see some of the things that I usually normally do as I get into the studio. So normally I would start out, the first thing I usually do is well, first of all, in my studio, you won't see a lot of golden paint, but rather, instead of golden paint, I use lots of glitters. These are my sort of choice of painting. Instead of using sort of golden stuff, I normally just use Mod Podge to mix it in. It's almost like a glue substance that you combine. And then as I begin, sometimes I do love mixing glitter together to form different colors. And so for me, working with a limited palette is really good often too. But normally I don't just start painting on top of my canvases. I have to draw and sort of do different sort of kind of things with it. And so normally I start with Jelly Roll. This is my favorite form of drawing or sketch that I do. And so it allowed me to see the color, the shininess of how I would try to make kind of things. But most of the time, I would say 75% of the time, when I get in the studio, I don't normally start the work. I normally just get into the studio and start sorting the main component of my painting, which is jewels or acrylic bedazzle. And so once I sort of sort them here, and then I would organize it into little sort of containers from different size to the different shapes. And then once they are organized, then they go into their own little sections. And this majority of the times are done, I would say 75% is sorting out acrylic jewels. For the most part, oftentimes people ask me, well, I mean, why are you working using these acrylic jewels? And for me, they have a very significant meanings. I mean, I love Michael's. I love to go there all the time to get my stuff. But for me, when I see these, it reminded me of sort of my own connections to as a refugees. Oftentimes, when you think about refugees, you think about these replaceable people who are not significant, but for me, it is very significant. It reminds me of my time in Thailand, of 500 of our families who were stuffed into a warehouse factory. We all living on the floor of the factories, and all of us sort of squished into one single factory. And just like that, here, for me, to do this, to sort of separate, give each color its individual's area. Doing all this, it add a different meaning, because by giving them a place, a meaning, a purpose, it makes them shine a little bit brighter, you know? Like some of these painting, like how it lives on the certain painting. So it's insignificant in a pile that you see here, but then when it lives here in a certain way, just like its family, it has a role, it has a purpose. And so it becomes a much more meaningful aspect. And so for me, doing these type of work allow me to think about some of the aspect of how we see refugees. And so that's the significant part about these kind of things. And so 75% of my time sitting here, thinking about me and my families, when we were in refugee camps, then us living in the United States, you know, being a part of little things. But, you know, what end up is that once these things are sorted, I do have a place for them to live, and how they can sort of become part of all my paintings. And then the other part is just sitting down. Take normal, regular shapes, objects, and keep drawing and rotating, taking one shape at a time, and rotate until it generates a new shape. And then once it generates a new shape, think it how to do it. And as I draw them, I begin to take X-Acto knife and start cutting these out in little sections carefully. Sometimes not careful enough, you can kind of chip off certain parts. But for the most part, just sitting down, cutting, thinking about the different kind of patterns I can form when I enlarge or reduce it. I can make small version or a large version, and a sort of how it kind of lives. So with my current body of work, I am slowly moving toward this new piece as I'm working here. These are sort of my aunt and uncle, who are the first refugees of my family, who left and came to Malaysia. And from Malaysia, they have to live there for at least a year before they come to the United States. That was the late 70s up until the 80s. And so here they are. And here they are now, as I begin building these patterns and gluing them onto the photograph, these new photograph of them living their life begin to sort of shown through. So these are the new work that I'm beginning to build, thinking about the figures as I abstract the figures, what am I bringing, how I'm bringing them in, and thinking about what does it mean. The more I think about my pattern, the more I kind of think that they remind me of all the barbed wires, all the fences that sort of either enclose us into the refugee camps or keep other people out of the camp. And so more and more as I make these new body of work, I either enclose the figures in them, or more and more I'm thinking about how to sort of begin creating figures out of them, and hoping that they can hang in sort of like in the air because of the weight. Oh, excuse me. So for me, I think a lot about the heaviness of the situations. For me, like with this, they hang so insignificantly, but as we begin to connect more and more, glue more and more out of this and built a figure, how heavy would it be if we were to have like my mother holding my sister, or my aunt holding my cousins, What if these figures are being made out of these patterns, and the more they're being made and the more they come out visually, how heavy would they be as they hang? As such, we think about the issues of how heavy it is to think about what does it mean to separate some of the children from the parents at the border, or how heavy it is to return someone to their countries of origin. So these are the current body of work that sort of began making, working with, and connecting. And so I hope to have the opportunity to sort of build more out of it. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, like a lot of the time, we're trapped inside, and oftentimes it becomes insulated. And so some of my ideas are changing. And also with the passing of my father, the notions of the figures become sort of changes with me too. And so I'm going to have to see with the next 1 or 2 months how sort of my work expand beyond what I'm showing you right now. So most of these work were as of probably April 9th was the last time I touched it. Then my father passed away April 11th, and it became even more significant for me in terms of thinking about his identity. And so I'm going through a process of reflecting about my own personal work, but at the same time of how do I want to remember him, and having the world think about of him as more of his stories coming out through my own works. So yeah, well, I hope you get a glance into my studio and see what I do most of the time. Yeah, I'm a bedazzler. I sort jewels more than painting.
Oh wow, Khan, I can't thank you enough. That was really beautiful. And it's, I had a lot of really amazing connections with the work. Certainly the pattern making and the stenciling reminded me of your printmaking techniques. And I really appreciate that you showed how you're using these everyday shapes to create those patterns. But what really strikes me is that, there's such a strong connection to your discipline and your craft, and then this careful, meticulous building up of the surfaces in a way that you're caring for the people within them. You're honoring the memories, you're creating these memorials. And I think that as you continue to develop your relationship with your father's memory, it will only get stronger. So I'm so happy that you were able to do this with us today, and give us the chance to really reflect on your work. So thank
Thank you.
you.